Hey kittens! Today we are going to be reading 2 fantastic answers from Reddit's r/askhistorians. Please hit the like and subscribe button and enjoy. The first one is titled, I'm a medieval toddler having dinner with my family. Do I refuse to eat peas and throw my spoon like my modern contemporaries, or are the terrible twos and tantrums a modern phenomenon as some would suggest? And we will be reading an answer from user edhistory101. Great question. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it straddles different topics, eras, and historiography, which makes it an adventure to answer and difficult to give you a single answer. This doesn't mean it can't be done, but in the spirit of Ask Historians, an answer about the layers of history in your question. And then an attempt at an answer. First, there's the matter of what we can infer from children's behavior centuries ago based on what adults put down in writing and which writing endured. There's the use of your word toddler, which is a fairly modernish term. Usage dates to the late 1700, that describes a human in a particular stage of development distinct from previous or subsequent stages, and this notion of distinct stages has its own history. Then there's the specificity in your question around the terrible twos, which is a very short window of time in a human's life about which an adult may or may not write. I feel comfortable saying 2-year-olds medieval toddlers weren't keeping food and behavior journals. Finally, there's how the adults around the child constructed boundaries for behaviors and how they vary in terms of what's considered an inappropriate tantrum or an appropriate expression of independence. These boundaries are shaped by a society's, be it modern or medieval, thinking about gender, disability status, race, religion, class, the nature of childhood itself, the expectation of children, and in the case of your question, dietary habits. It's helpful to spend a bit more time thinking about one of the challenges in your question, your precision. It's a great detail, but alas, it makes it a bit harder to answer, as a historian of the medieval era can probably shed some light on the eating habits of toddlers but likely won't be able to explicitly say yes, this thing happened, because the adults who wrote about children wouldn't have used your level of precision. I often experience similar tensions in American education history. I can rattle off anecdotes I've come across from teacher journals from the mid-1800s where a child is described as misbehaving, her words, but the child's age is often not noted, the youngest Smith boy, or is described in the context of when they attended school, winter session. However, I also know that her journal writing is informed by the social pressure she experienced related to how well she did her job. So, it's difficult to know for sure if what she's describing as misbehavior was the sort of thing children did because they are children, or truly something dangerous or harmful. And to complicate it, the same teacher might write home that the same child was an absolute hellion to her, but through sheer force of will and motherly instincts, she was able to calm him down and teach him his letters. And by the way, if the school board was interested in buying new books for the school, she knows this particular boy simply loves to read. Which is to say, she's a bit of an unreliable narrator with regards to the things children in her charge did. So, if you asked, have 7-year-old boys always hated school? I couldn't say for sure. I could tell you there are instances of teachers reporting boys around age 7 or so did not like doing the thing they asked them to do. Although related in historiography and themes to the history of education, there is a separate branch of historians who study the history of childhood and youth. It's their work that can help us understand the imprecision regarding age I described above is not a universal trait. As an example, Berner, 2014, looked at the rituals in the lives of Ashkenazic Jews in the 1700s and could describe down to particular years how children were treated because a child's age played a role in the rituals of the community. From her 2014 article, very young infants were often brought to the synagogue. Bringing toddlers and children under the age of 3 or 5 was usually discouraged. So it's possible a historian of Ashkenazic Jewish childhood could speculate how 2-year-olds might have responded to food they disliked, but it's difficult for us to extrapolate from one community to the broad category of human 2-year-olds across an entire extended era. Finally, there's the issue of taste. That is, this idea we wouldn't eat something, or allow a toddler to pick and choose, because of the taste or flavor has its own complicated history that I dipped my toe in and promptly turned around. Perhaps a food historian can chime in on the history of food for toddlers, but again, it would be difficult for us to extrapolate from taste to behavior to patterns over time. That said, I'm going to go out on a limb and say no. To be sure, historians can look at the historical record and reach different conclusions. It happens routinely and is, in truth, one of my favorite parts of doing history. So, it's entirely possible someone is writing another post in which they say, yes, and here's what leads me to that conclusion. I, however, am going to say no, and here's why. It's very possible that a 2-year-old in 1066, when faced with a spoonful of food, offered a very strong opinion that indicated they did not want to eat that food, thank you very much. And given what we know about universalities of human development, it's very likely they did. However, the heart of your question is how the adults responded, not what the child did. The very notion of a tantrum is a fairly modern, 20th century, concept. That is, the idea of toddler expressing their opinion strongly and vocally in response to a request for an adult deserves its own name, tantrum, emerged from the idea that there is typical child behavior, or normal and abnormal behavior that needs to be redressed. I wrote about the field of child study in response to the question, what is the history behind what is your favorite color? And the movement's impact can be seen in your question, and in fact, the curiosity behind your question. In effect, they asked the same thing you're asking, why do small humans do these things that big humans don't? The founder of the movement, a man named G. Stanley Hall, was fascinated by this idea that the attributes of childhood could be observed and studied in the same way scientists studied the natural world. This isn't to say adults before the Hall came along in the late 1800s weren't curious about children's motivations, or had opinions, but rather, Hall created structures that gave rise to developmental psychology, child psychiatry, and societies for mental hygiene focused on children's behavior. The field of child psychology encouraged doctors and parents to frame children's behaviors as good or bad, healthy or unhealthy. Kathleen Jones' 1999 book, Taming the Troublesome Child, American Families, Child Guidance, and the Limits of Psychiatric Authority, goes into more detail about how this history evolved and explores how the theories behind a child's tantrum ran the gauntlet from their mother gave them too much attention as a baby to their mother didn't give them enough attention as a baby. Public health, especially child health, was a very popular social issue in the early 1900s, and doctors around the warned of disastrous events if a child's bad behavior weren't fixed. Thus, tantrums became something to be handled and fixed, rather than something children did. While adults in previous eras would and could describe children's behavior on a continuum or scale in relation to their siblings or other children, what Hall and his contemporaries did was related to scale and norming. They collected thousands of anecdotes about children, detailing everything toddlers did and wrote about patterns. Which is to say, did medieval toddlers strongly and vocally express their opinions about food? Probably. Did parents see such opinions as abnormal behavior that needed to be handled? Likely not. Thank you so much to Ed History 101 for that fantastic answer. The sources he linked are on the screen now, and we're going to move straight on to our next story. This question is titled, I am a child in a middle-class family in medieval Europe. What kind of toys my parents can offer for me? And we will be reading an answer by user Sun Against Gold. Middle-class children in the medieval West is a great social group to frame this question around. Some of our best and most direct evidence for children's toy culture relates directly to the urban burgher classes, and in some cases wealthy peasants. These are, 1. Illuminations and woodcuts of allegorized childhood, and of the Holy Family, which is often depicted by 15th-century urban artists as a comfortable household, in contrast to the stress on the poverty of Christ and Mary in other iconography. 2. References to adults purchasing toys, which implies their manufacture by, exactly, urban craftsmen. 3. Archaeological finds that we can tie to children through apparently continuous use of similar types through to the Industrial Revolution. Some of the most frequently mentioned as bought include rattles, hobby horses, and dolls. Sometimes doll is written as pop or poppet, which we'd recognize as more puppet. This is also a possibility, and I don't just mean because of the excellent beginning of Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame. We have manuscript illuminations of people playing with marionette-like puppets. Of course, dolls are one of the toys children also definitely made themselves. Typically, this was out of rags. But parents definitely also bought dolls for their kids. Purchased dolls would be more durable. Nicholas Orme notes that England imposed duties on imported puppets or babies for children that were made out of wood. Reference to rag dolls are generally humanoid form. I do wonder if they served a similar purpose as squishy stuffed animals today in comparison to stiffer forward/harder dolls. Woodcuts, such as of Joseph and Mary playing with little Jesus in a typical German parlor, give us some insight into toys in action. There were little tops to spin, and larger tops to drive with a stick or leather strap, along with developing hand-eye coordination and strength. Commercially bought hobby horses get ridden around, hoops get rolled with sticks. I also want to talk about the metal alloy miniatures found in excavations of towns. Now, tying material evidence specifically to children's use as toys is not a straightforward assumption, especially for the Middle Ages. I've talked in a couple of earlier answers about the imitatio Marii devotion practiced especially but not only by late medieval nuns. They imitated Mary by rocking, swaddling, and pretend nursing dolls of the Christ child. However, in the case of these metal miniatures, similar items are found in artwork depicting children and in excavations associated with children /families into the 19th century. Apparently, blacksmiths, makers of pilgrimage badges, and related craftsmen would also manufacture child-size versions of knights on horseback, pots and pitchers, and dolls with movable arms. In other words, action figure dolls, equipment for playing house, and posable figures or puppets. This is hardly a complete picture of the play world of medieval middle-class children. Gerald of Wales' brother built sand castles. Gerald, naturally, built a sand monastery. Kids played games like blindman's buff, ice skating in the Netherlands, and snowball fights wherever there was snow were treasured winter activities for young and old alike. I've also written about the imagination worlds /games of medieval children, if you're interested. Yes, medieval children had job responsibilities. Yes, middle-class girls and boys were often working as servants already in their young teenage years, generally, to save up money for a dowry and to set up a household once they reached their early mid-20s, at least in northwest Central Europe. But they had ample time to play. And between their own inventiveness and their parents' care and money, they had toys with which to do so. Thank you so much for listening to the end. Let me know what kind of stories you want me to read next. Give the like and subscribe button a head scratch and have a fantastic rest of your day.